Guten Nachmittag. Ich heiße Koch Raleigh Schmidt. In English, that means good afternoon. My name is Chef Raleigh Schmidt, and I will be talking to you today about sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is a tangy cabbage dish that's usually served on the side that comes from a German name, however, a Central Asian origin. Sauerkraut in German means sour cabbage. They weren't very adventurous with the name. However, it is still a very delicious dish that can be used on a Reuben sandwich or a side with Vienna sausage. It's very tangy and very delectable. Now, the inspiration today for making sauerkraut comes from one of my great ancestors who immigrated from Bavaria to the United States back in the late 1800s. His name was Matthias Schmidt, and I like to think that my love for sauerkraut stems from his love for sauerkraut back when he was in the homeland of Bavaria. All right, now with sauerkraut, there are very few ingredients that go along with this. There's cabbage, sea salt, the removal of air, and thyme. Thyme coincides with the process of fermentation. With fermentation, there are three different phases that go along with this. There's the phase that involves the Enterobacter species. There's the second phase that involves the Leuconostoc species. And there's the third phase that involves the Lactobacillic species. The overall goal that's occurring is we have glucose in the cabbage. This will then be deprotonated by an NAD+ that is going by, along with leucine phosphate groups, to create 2-pyruvate. This process is also known as glycolysis. But it goes a step further to create lactic acid by adding hydrogen protons to then lower the pH of the species. Now the lactic acid, that is how we get the tangy sour flavor in the sauerkraut. All right, so like I said, there are very few things that go into making sauerkraut. The most important one being the cabbage. Right here I have half a head of cabbage. You'll need a whole head. You will also need a large mixing bowl, a sharp knife. So I would say Julian Smith, when you're making this, make sure that you have adult supervision. A quart-sized mason jar with proper lids that go with it. Trust me, I had trouble with this. Also, proper sea salt, not iodized. Make sure that's sea salt. And a couple of mixing spoons. The first step that you need to do is make sure you take off the large, coarser leaves off the head of the cabbage. So just sort of rip it off like this, take off some of these pieces, and then you're going to take the cabbage like this, and you're going to want to make sure to cut it in half. This part, be very careful, but at the same time, be very strong and push down firmly because these things can be kind of tough. Like I said, they can be a little tough. Here we go. All right. So now you have your quartered cabbage. You want to be able to take out the core that's right here. So make sure to cut that piece out because that will be no good when you're trying to make your sauerkraut. It'll have no flavor and it'll taste not great. So here you're going to want to make sure that you cut thin slices. You want as thin as you can do. There will be a little bit of collateral damage. You might see some cabbage flying around the room, but that's okay. We can clean it up. All right, so the next step, once all of this is chopped up in a nice thin slices, you're going to place this into a large mixing bowl. And as you can see, this is only half a head of cabbage, so you're going to need a lot of space when you're doing a whole head of cabbage. All right, so the next step, once you've gotten the cabbage into the mixing bowl, is you're going to want to add some sea salt to it. Again, make sure that this is sea salt and not iodized salt. The fermentation process won't happen properly if there's iodized salt in there. So for a whole head of cabbage, you would use roughly 2 to 3 teaspoons. It just depends on your preference. For this, we're going to just use 1 for right now because it's a smaller size. It also depends on the size of cabbage that you have. Again, that's sort of a personal preference, so just sort of do it at your will. And then you're going to want to start massaging the sea salt into the cabbage and really start to press down hard and try to make sure that you get the water from the cabbage out into sort of a soupy juice that collects in the bottom. Now, let me remind the viewers at home, make sure to add the sea salt before you start massaging the cabbage. If you don't do this, it's hard to get the water and brine to come out of the cabbage. The sea salt creates a concentration gradient. There's a low concentration of water, high concentration of salt on the outside, whereas inside the cabbage there's a low concentration of salt and a high concentration of water, thus causing the water to come out of the cabbage and into the bowl. That's where we get the brine. So as you're transferring this over, for some people like myself, my hands are just a little bit too big to be able to fit inside the mason jar and press it down firmly and compactly. You need to make sure that it's really compact in there. So if that's the case, you need to find some kind of tool to be able to help you with it. Luckily for me, I have my trusty half-cup measuring cup right here that's in my back lederhosen pocket, as all people should have. And I'll be able to press down a little bit more firmly on the cabbage so that it'll be down there nice and compact. After you put the cabbage leaves on top of the rest of the shredded cabbage and you have that nice layer of brine on top, you're going to take a bag of sorts, usually a Ziploc bag, could be freezer, sandwich, whichever one fits the current container that you have. You want to press it down into the container, and you're going to want to pour a little bit of water in there so that you can sort of weigh this down so that you kind of create your own force to press down and have the air come out. You're going to want to zip it, but make sure that you keep most of the air out. Make sure to add water accordingly so that you have the least amount of air in there as possible. You want to press that air out as best you can as you're sealing it, because you want this to fit just underneath so that you can take one of your lids like this, which you can get at any sort of grocery store. Take this out, press it on top, and then you're going to take your screw lid. Again, make sure that it's secure on top. Take your screw lid and screw it down so that it's nice and tight. All right, and for the final step, make sure that it's nice and sealed and put it away in a nice room temperature, preferably dark space. Make sure to check on it periodically, usually every day, and then after roughly 2 weeks, you can then open it up and have a nice dish of sauerkraut. You might find a layer of foam on top that's natural, that comes from the fermentation process. But yeah, just let it sit for a while and then hopefully you'll have a delicious dish. Welcome back. We have now reached the 2-week mark, showing that our sauerkraut has now properly fermented. Here we have our final product. We're going to take a little taste test of it today. But to help me, I'm going to have my assistant, Fraulein Carson, come on the show and taste with me.
Guten Tag.
Thank you. So here we have ourselves the final product. It now has lost all that green coloration that it had originally and is practically all white. All right, now we're going to do the taste test. Thank you, Carson. Dump a little bit out of there. As you can see, it has that nice sort of flaky yet moist look. All right, now for the moment of truth. Definitely a good tang. It's a different kind of crunch. Almost like a rubbery crunch. A great flavor. He loves it. It's fantastic. I would definitely throw this on a nice hot Reuben sandwich and I'd be in Flavor Town immediately.
What do you think, Frau Carson?
That was one of the worst things I've put in my mouth.
One of, so not the worst.
Correct.
So as you can see, the sauerkraut was more or less a success in my book. So I'm very proud of the work that I've done. I think we made a great dish, and I'm really proud of the fermentation process and what it's done for me. I hope it's doing well for you and all of your cuisine making. Thank you so much for showing up to this, and auf Wiedersehen.